All right, thank you. So again, thanks everyone for making time to come to this meetup. I hope everyone has been well in the last week that we've been opening up. So today we are honored to have Dr. Caitlin Walker speak at our meetup. And some of us, again, may know her work on clean language and from a TEDx speech. Caitlin is the director of clean learning and the developer of systemic modeling, and has been designing, experimenting, testing, updating, and redesigning interventions that support groups to become self-organizing. She began with teenagers outside of the school system, moved into IT companies, and now delivers projects and trains her approach around the world. She is author of From Contempt to Curiosity, Creating the Conditions for Groups to Collaborate, and So You Want to Be Drama-Free, and has recently completed a PhD in clean language interviewing as a research methodology. So born in Jos, Nigeria, she currently lives near Liverpool and can be found doing executive, team, and organizational coaching in person and online. So, all right, thanks, Caitlin, for being here. It's an honor. And over to you.
Lovely to be here. I was just thinking when you were saying about Victor, about how did you come to be interested in metaphors in coaching? And I think my interest in metaphor was, it started as a child. It started, like lots of kids suddenly go, oh, I wonder if my blue is the same as your blue. Like, I wonder if the way my brain processes things means that I do or don't see what you process. And I just got interested in what's the invisible architecture like that we can't see. And we can see differences in height and hair color and eye color and skin color, and we can do that kind of stuff. But what about what's going on underneath? So my interest into clean language and into this whole methodology was, how do I know what's going on with your stuff when the only way I know how to perceive what you've said is through my own stuff? So this is how I got interested. So what we're going to do this evening, for some of you, this lunchtime for others, and early morning for those of you coming in from America, we're going to do a bit about metaphors, a little bit about the methodology that I'm going to use, about clean, what does it mean to be clean, and what does it mean to be adjacent? And then we're going to be asking you 3 questions. So these are going to be metaphors that you're going to develop. And for this session to go really well for me, if you can share your answers either in the chat, or if you're the sort of person who's happy to speak, then just unmute yourself and share your answers out loud. Raise your hand and I'll see you. The 3 questions I'm going to be asking you are, when you're working at your best, you're like what? What are you like when you're at your best? Another question I'm going to be asking you is, what are you like at your worst? When you're absolutely at your worst. And for some of you, that might be, you might get angry when you're at your worst. You might be like a volcano. You might be like a volcano that builds up and then explodes out. Or you might be like me. When I'm at my worst, I'm very quiet, like a sniper. And you won't know, once you've crossed a line, if I'm really at my worst, I'll be waiting. Or you might be overwhelmed, you might be letting balls drop, whatever you're like. We'll be asking you, when you're at your worst, you're like what? And then the final question we'll be asking you is making decisions. We'll be asking you to think about a time when you've been making decisions. And for you, making decisions is like what? What is it like? But if I come back to why metaphors, when I first started this work, as you'll hear if you've seen my TED talk, this example might even be in it. I worked with teenagers. I asked them things like, when you're at your worst, you're like what? And they give me answers, and we would build up these metaphor models of how each of them experienced the world. And it went really well, because as they learned each other's models, the metaphors became like teaching tools. And as they learned one another's, a bit like engineers, they were like, oh, you're engineered like that. You go red and it builds up. It starts blue and you're cool, and it builds into maroon, and then it goes into red and it comes out of your fists. That's an engineering model for one human. We go, what about this one? This one's going along as normal, and suddenly it switches. Ah, this is a very speedy way of responding in anger. It's not structured the way this one's structured. If you want to interfere or work with this model, you need a different set of criteria. And the teenagers seem to go really well with this. We'd get metaphors for doing maths. So how do you add up numbers? How do you do it? How do you do it? And then they would not only understand their own metaphors, but they would learn from one another's and start to update their own systems, borrowing good engineering tips from one metaphor to another. So that was great. And I was very excited. And then somebody said, of course, can you do this in business? Can you come into an IT company? And it was a very interesting experience, because I don't know how the rest of you are, but there was a part of me that really wanted to do well and wanted to be well thought of. But the rules around clean language and metaphor elicitation is that you can't really have an agenda. That the more of an agenda you have, the worse questions you ask. You have to kind of have a calm, neutral stance and ask questions to really understand how the other system works before you try and take it and think about it or argue with it. We call it avoiding premature evaluation. You've got to be calm. But I wanted them to like me, and I wanted them to like the work I was doing. So when I went to the first IT company that I'd ever worked in, and the engineer came to me and he said, no, Caitlin, he said, I've heard that this is voluntary, this work that we're doing to get one joint metaphor for the whole company. He said, I'm a very busy person. I don't think that I really want to be here. You have to sell it to me. You've got 5 minutes. And I said to him, in a part of me wanted to say all sorts of good things, just the way I do right now with you guys. I want to say all the things I care about and have you buy into these ideas. But actually, the truth of it is, it might not suit you. It might not suit him. So I calmed myself down and I said, well, rather than me try and sell it to you, why don't we just do some? I said, you know, if this project was to go really well for you, it would be like what? And he was like, yeah, I don't understand that question. I don't want to talk to you about it. I know I don't want to be here. I said, well, just give me a minute. You said I could have 5 minutes. For me, if this project went really well, it would be like whitewater rafting. It would be, we'd start up high, we'd all get in a boat. It would be exciting. We wouldn't know where we were going. We'd start rafting down the river. Maybe it'd be a bit slow at first, but then it'd be exhilarating. We'd all fall in, but it's okay because we'd have safety equipment. We'll get back in the boat. And you could see him as I'm talking. He's just like this. He said, okay, that's enough. He said, I do not want to work with you and I don't want to do this project. And I said, okay, that's fine. But I've still got 5 minutes and that just took one. So if you had to do the project, if this wasn't voluntary and a project was to go really well for you, that project should be like what? And he said, it should be like blueprints, really carefully drawn. And each print, each diagram should scale up and match and correspond to the project that we're going to do. And as he's talking, I'm like this, oh. And you could just think for a minute, what seems to be important about my metaphor? So my metaphor about whitewater rafting, what seems to, as far as you're concerned, and you can write this in the chat or you can say it out loud, what seems to be of value to me?
Action.
Action, yep. What else? Excitement, yep. What else? Yeah, so Piers noticing it's discovery. So the pieces that he liked least are things like us all falling in. We all fall in and we all have to climb out. So yeah, Peter's going, yeah, exhilaration, ambiguity, the unknown. What seems to be important to him? So these are carefully drawn blueprints and they correspond exactly.
Precision.
Absolutely. Precision, detail, prediction, predictability. And what you want to start to look at is where are they clashing? How come each of us are control? So think about his level of control. So I have a high need for safety and a high need for chaos. Yeah, there's very little chaos in blueprints. And my need for chaoticness and emergence is well going to clash with his need for control and precision. So I said to him, okay, I can see you don't want to do my metaphor. I don't want to do yours. Let's just imagine we have to work together. What would have to be true about my whitewater rafting so that you can come on board? He said, okay, we'd have to stop regularly. We'd have to chart it. There'd have to be maps. I could gather samples so that when we finish the journey, we're in a very different place from when we started. I'm like, do you know what? Somebody has to do that in any of my projects because it's not me. I need somebody who keeps records, who keeps detail. It's like, great, I could do that. I said, in yours, with your blueprints, could they be done in pencil? So that as we go from the blueprints to the building, with each layer, as we've got new information, could we rub out? Oh yeah, he said, no, that's great. He said, it's really nice to go back so long as it corresponds with data. Brilliant. And he went, oh, I get it. I see why metaphor is important in teams. He said, because normally I would just hate someone like you, and I would get other people together who also hated you, and then we'd just sit together and talk about how awful you were. He said, but what this is he said, it's a way of forcing us to be able to live in each other's worlds safely. It's like, great, that's it. And it was really good. So this was my first experience of going into an organization that wasn't used to using metaphors at all. Very good engineers, but they didn't talk about the invisible architecture of humans. And luckily for me, it just so happened that a university was in with the BBC and they filmed the whole project because they were interested in an organization that particularly then an all-male organization that were very rigid in their thinking, and they wanted to see how did they respond to creative management. So that sort of launched me into getting interested in how do you bring metaphors as a useful tool to people who aren't used to them, and not flowery metaphors in a sort of literary sense, but metaphors which demonstrate how do we think, how do we interact with one another. So just before I go on to the methodology, are there any questions or comments just with what we've done so far? Yeah, so I've got Piers. Anyone else just got any questions just before? Then I'll start.
I'm just wondering if you didn't use the word metaphor with the gentleman and instead you said something like mental models, that might have been more appealing to people like engineers.
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes, and I do sometimes use mental models instead of metaphors. And you know, some people don't understand what mental model is, and they'd rather use metaphors. So have a couple of different descriptions available to yourself. Yeah, that's a part of the clean approach, is you've got to make it useful to the person in front of you. Not, I never said to my teenagers, hey, we're going to go and get some metaphors, because that was too far from their experience. I just said, my job is to help make sure that you get the kind of the results that you want. Does anyone here get into trouble when it wasn't their fault, when they didn't mean to? They're like, yeah. I said, well, I can teach you how to control your tempers so that you only hit people if you really want to, not because someone else makes you. And that worked really well. And then we could do it, you know. Pierre, have you got a question?
My question is, like, you were sharing your metaphor and he was giving his. At that point, will you how to say, give up your metaphor and will continue to work with this?
No, I said I couldn't.
Okay.
I mean, have a think about it for yourself. Well, as we go through it.
Okay.
And that's for a project. So for a project, my metaphor is whitewater rafting. But if my metaphor for working at my best is I'm in a heavy metal mosh pit.
No,
yeah?
But I was thinking the other person was giving his own metaphor, but it was completely different. When you continue the dialogue, in general, if in this kind of dialogue, will you adapt? So you will stop your metaphor and continue to work with his own metaphor, or you will try to build one together?
If I have to work with him, so like if I have to work, then we have to find a compromise.
Okay.
But if we don't, like supposing there's 10 of us in this Zoom room, we all work together, maybe, you know, a bunch of engineers and there's a bunch of programmers, the programmers have to work together, maybe. It's like you have to work out, a lot of clean is what's the least this team has to do to adjust their metaphor for somebody else.
Okay.
It's never, like, I could not give up being who I am and think at my best. And the reason that this is important to everyone is we are neurodiverse. Some of us are brilliant at processing very quickly. That tends to be my thing. Generally, a very, very quick talker, thinker, not great at the detail, you know. So if you want me to work at my best, you need to put me with somebody who's very precision, who thinks about the risks, who keeps records of things, who remembers. But we might not work always very closely together because we're going to annoy each other. And if we don't understand the difference, I tell you, a lot of my work comes from mediation. I get brought in when companies go wrong. And the number of times it's because each of them assumes the other's invisible architecture is the same as theirs. So you have people who say, they don't trust me. And I say, what lets you know? What do you see and hear that lets you know they don't trust you? Oh, they're always asking me for details. So, okay, so when they ask you for details, for you, that means they don't trust you. When they ask for you for details, what happens next? Well, I have to go and look at the files to find out what the answers are. And that interrupts my work. I say, okay, hold on a minute. Here's the other person. I said, you know, when you ask them for details, I said, let me ask you some details. You know, when you think about your team, when are their birthdays? And they know all of them. I said, when you think about your team, where are they up to in their projects? They know all of it. They don't have to look at files. They know it all in their heads. And so this person assumes this person has all the detail. This person, when they ask for it, and this person doesn't give it to them for 2 days, assumes that they're deliberately withholding the detail. They don't realize that person has to go and look it up. But maybe this person is really good at relationships and they're very good at interactions and bringing the team along, and this person isn't. So, you know, so a lot of areas where people start to not trust one another, it's because their invisible architecture is differently organized. And that's where the metaphors are so useful, is because they're very handy ways to understand the engineering of different human beings. Okay, so let's do a little bit of the methodology. So if you want to get metaphors from other people, we'll just do a tiny bit of this, but then I'll demonstrate it in the exercises. We're going to look at what's called clean questions. These were developed by David Grove. He's a psychotherapist. He's half Maori, so he's from New Zealand. And adjacency. Can somebody just give me a definition of adjacency?
Side by side.
Side by side? Great. Who can give me another definition? A different description of adjacency. Just because it's a key concept, I want to make sure that you all get it. Okay, I'll demonstrate with my cups. Here are my cups. So at the moment, if this was the focus, if this was the metaphor that somebody said, my dotty cup is adjacent to my duck cup. And my turquoise cup is adjacent to the dotty cup, but it's not quite so adjacent to the duck cup. It's a little bit further away. So this is what we mean. But in clean, that's as you need to stay about that adjacent. If I had an extra hand and I could do another cup, you've gone too far away from your source, from the duck. So let me just show you that. I'll show you by asking this first question. Oh, hang on, there's close to each other. They could be different. So I'm just looking at some of your answers now. So adjacent means they're close. They could be different. So they don't have to be the same thing to be adjacent. So, for example, if somebody says, they don't trust me, and I say to them, what do you see or hear that lets you know they don't trust you? I haven't gone away from the don't trust. The don't trust is here. I've asked for a different class of information adjacent to the don't trust. Yeah. If I'd said, have you had other examples in your life where you haven't been trusted? That's a lot less adjacent. If I'd said, but they're a really lovely person, I'm sure that's not true. That's nowhere near what they just said. It's got nothing to do with it. It's to do with my head and my ideas and not to do with them. So this is what I mean by adjacency. It could be a different class of information, but to get really good at eliciting metaphors, stay close to what they've said. I just saw that there's a question in there. I just want to read it. That's from Gretel. What happens if a metaphor explanation is something that the other person can't relate to? Yeah, well, we'll come to that, Gretel, because that will come up in here. So like my mosh pit, if you've never been in a mosh pit, you don't understand what a brilliant metaphor that is. But so I might have to change it to something that makes sense to you. And it's also similar. We have cultural food metaphors, we have sport metaphors, we have all sorts of different metaphors that don't make sense in another language. Yeah, so yeah, you just got to be a little bit careful of them, and you need to work out something that both of you can culturally relate to, otherwise they don't quite work together. When we've translated books into other languages, we've had to use locally sourced metaphors. Great. So let's look at some of this clean and adjacency, but with some answers from you. So please use the chat and say, when you're working at your best, you're like what? When you're working at your best, you're like what? And I'm looking for some answers that are metaphorical and some answers that are not metaphorical. I'm going to see if I can lengthen my chat box so that I can see more of it. Yeah. Okay. So let me take a couple of these. And is there anyone who's happy to be a speaking demo? I'd quite like to have two. Okay, so I've got John is happy to be one. Anyone else is happy to be one? Is that Victor? Is that nodding? Yeah. Okay, I'll take John and I'll take Victor. I'll take some of these as well, but I'll take John and I'll take Victor. But I'm going to start with JF. So JF is flowing and creative. So if I want to know, I want to stay close to one of these two words. So let's take flowing. So this is the word flowing that JF's written. I want to ask questions that help to accept and extend the word flowing. So I could ask about the attributes of flowing. I could ask, so don't answer yet, JF. I'm just going to ask, what kind of flowing is that flowing? And when you're flowing, is there anything else about that flowing? It just says, tell me a little bit more. Kind of what kind of a thing is it? Is there anything else about it? They're very, very adjacent questions. So I can ask about attributes. Or I might ask about location. You know, there's loads of different ways that you could flow. Somebody give me some different examples. You have to shout out, how could we flow?
I'm talking about the state of flow.
Yeah, you could have the state of...
Yeah, being absorbed in what I'm doing, that I forget the time.
Yeah, so Mahesh could say, right, it's a state of flow, it's me being absorbed in it. Yeah, what's a different way that you could flow? I've got John says you could flow smoothly. What are some other kinds of flows? Yeah, It could be a turbulent. So when I'm flowing, I could be flowing, it could be a turbulent flow, a bit like my whitewater rafting. It could be fluent. I could be in the flow. It could be like the flow, it's flowing through me. I could be absorbed in it. It could be flowing from yoga, flowing from different positions. It could be really fast. It could be really slow. It could be that the work is flowing. It could be dissociated from the person. So the big reason for this adjacency and this clean is so that you don't impose the stuff you just made up on JF. So we might ask JF, when it's flowing, where is it flowing? So I might ask for location. Where is it flowing? Or when it's creative, what kind of creative? Or when it's creative, where is it creative? And those are probably enough for now, but I could also ask for sequence. I could say, okay, so what happens just before it's flowing? We've got some more pens. I could say when it's flowing, I can ask about the sequence. What happens just before? Or when it's creative, where does the creative come from? What do the sequence forward? When it's flowing, then what happens? Or when you're creative, what happens next? So these are all ways of expanding just those words. So Jeff, can I get you to answer a couple of those? I know I told you not to before, but now could you answer a couple in the chat? So when it's flowing, where is it flowing?
In my mind.
In my mind.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know it sounds abstract. I'm not sure if it works for me.
The thing is, what Jeff doesn't know is that every answer is perfect as far as I'm concerned, but we don't need to tell him that because he's just still going to try and get the right answer. That's all right. So it's flowing in my mind. And when in my mind it's flowing, and what kind of flowing is it? When you're working at your best and it's flowing in your mind, what kind of flowing is it?
I'm moving at just the right speed, not too fast, not too slow.
So it's moving at just the right speed, not too fast and not too slow. And if I want to get a metaphor for it, I can ask the like what question. So I can say when it's moving, not too fast and not too slow, and you're flowing in your mind, you're flowing like what?
Okay, I'm like a bird flying with a flock of other birds and we're just flying together.
So a bird flying with other birds and we're just flying together. Not too fast, not too slow. And I'm flowing and creative. What kind of creative?
Stuff just comes out of my hands, my fingers.
And it just comes out of my hands, that stuff, when I'm creative. Not too fast, not too slow, and I'm flowing. And it just comes out of my hands. When it comes out of my hands, where does that creative stuff come from?
Out of my, from inside my body to my palms and then out through my fingers.
So that stuff, when I'm working at my best, that creative stuff comes from inside my body, through my palms and out through my fingers. And I'm flowing like a bird with a flock of birds, not too fast and not too slow. Okay, so I'm just going to pause you there, Jeff. So again, with people, what are you noticing that I'm up to? Yikming is saying, are we trying to establish a context for mutual understanding? I'm trying to understand how JF works. And in the process, because I'm asking him unusual questions, he'll probably start to get a sense of how this all works. So I'm looking for the invisible architecture that produced those words. So anything else that you notice about what I'm doing, I'll put some of the questions in that I asked, but I'm essentially asking about attributes, sequence, metaphor. I didn't have to ask about location because he gave me them. You know, at first I said, where does it come from in his body? But he already told me it comes out of his fingertips. So what am I up to? Yeah, so I'm mirroring his selected words. Yeah, what else am I up to or not doing? Now, that's an interesting one. Just saying, is that Boney? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yep, it's Boney.
Boney. So Boney says, it seems that they're visual kinds of words. Now, I'm going to make a very crude hypothesis that Boney is able to visualize. You see, I'm not a visualizer. And so I don't think that they're visual words because I'm not making visions of them. So for somebody to think that they're visual words, they're probably able to make a visualization of them. Does that make sense? So Boney's going to be using their structures to make sense of it, but because I don't have that structure, there's nothing visual about these. Even the birds, for me, I've just got the word bird, and then I've got the word other birds, and the words not too fast, not too slow, and then I've got a little feeling. So just notice that that's one of the reasons we don't tend to say, what does it look like or what does it feel like? Because that's an imposition. But yeah, all of you, won't just be you, Boney, everyone who's making pictures will have made a picture of these birds. In fact, how many of you visualized that flock of birds? For those of you with your cameras off, I can't see, but I bet you loads of them did. Yeah, Gretel's visualizing away. What kind of bird did you imagine they were?
I always get the starlings of all the birds, you know, I think it was the carling ad that had all the starlings.
So yeah, so you've got the starlings from the, even potentially from the carling ad. Yeah. Who has a different kind of bird? Who didn't have starlings? There's usually some geese. Usually some people have geese around when they think of flocks of birds flying together. And of course, the only person who knows what kind of birds they are is JF. But the mind bores a vacuum. So what happens for us is to make sense of each other. We have to use our natural neurology to make pictures, or if you're like me, to make pictures of words. But we can ask Jeff, what kind of birds were they?
Crows and ravens.
Ah, and now we all have to update our metaphor because they're crows and ravens. And some of you who've made a really good image that suits your system, you'll be cross with him now for having the wrong birds. Like, no, they're not. That's not how that works. I know this because sorry?
I said, I've got rework to do.
Yeah, now she has to go and redraw that picture. And I know that this is true because I spent a lot of time when I first started realizing how useful this stuff was for interviewing. I worked with the police and we would play the game a little bit like this. And I said, see a plant. And the guy said, yep. He said, yeah, it's a purple plant. It's got a long flower. And his colleague said, oh, it's a hebe bush. He said, no, it's not a hebe bush. It's got a long flower and it smells really nice. And his colleague said, no, it's a hebe bush. I'm telling you. And he said, no, it's not a hebe bush. And his colleague got his phone out to get a picture of a hebe bush and he showed it to him. And he could not believe that they weren't seeing the same thing. And it wasn't, it was a lilac. But that level of disagreement, although that was funny and it made everyone in the group laugh, they fall out like that all the time in their team. that person always thinks that they know what the other person is thinking. And they were able to realize that actually this wasn't just useful as an interview tool, that this is one of the times when we realized it helps you see, oh, the way that we make sense of things affects the way that we trust what the other person's saying, the way that we make sense to each other in meetings. Okay, so this is just 2 words. That's JF's flowing and creative. Let me use John now. John, can I have your answer? Yeah, I'm just sorry, I've just seen some of the other birds. So some people had cranes. That's a cultural one.
Tuned in, I think.
Is yours, John, is that yours? Is yours tuned in?
Yes.
Okay, so just before we hear anything else from John. So that's our target, like my duck cup. And we're going to stay close to that. What can we already presume about tuned in? What predictions can we make about this metaphor?
Being on the same page.
Sorry?
Being on the same page.
So that another way of doing that, another metaphor, which could be a translation of it, is being on the same page.
Yeah, same frequency.
Yes, yeah, so obviously sometimes I think everyone sees metaphors, but the way I do, but I've been doing it for a long time now. So there has to be something that you're being tuned into. There has to be when you're not tuned in, tuned out, and there has to be an act. So this is an active. I've got to tune myself in some way, or does something else tune him in? So we don't know who the protagonist is in this story of tuning. Yeah. So let's just ask some of these questions again. Just to remind you, we can ask about sequence. We can ask for a metaphor, but we're not going to do that yet. It's kind of nice to ask some other things. We can ask location. And we can ask about attributes. So these are, if you're going to be clean, these are the things that you're allowed to do. So John, when you're tuned in, what kind of tuned in?
Synchronized sensitivity.
So it's a synchronized, a sensitivity. And when there's a sensitivity, where is that sensitivity?
It's in my heart and in my mind.
So now, a little bit like having extra cups, I've got more data points that I can ask about. So I've got sensitivity, I've got a heart, and I've got a mind. And these are aspects of being tuned in. So that's going to stay at the center, but I've got some other data points I can ask about. And it's my heart and my mind, and that's a sensitivity. Is there anything else about that sensitivity?
It's being connected and responsive.
Connected, connective or connected?
Connected.
Connected and responsive. And that's tuned in. And when you're tuned in, connected and responsive in your heart and your mind, whereabouts in your heart?
Deep in the middle.
So that's sensitivity deep in the middle of his heart. And whereabouts in your mind?
At the front of my mind.
That sensitivity deep in the middle of my heart and at the front of my mind, and I'm tuned in. And when I'm tuned in, Then what happens?
I listen very, very carefully.
And I listen very, very carefully. And then what happens when I listen like that?
I understand.
I listen very, very carefully and I understand. So again, just as you're listening to me, what am I up to? What's a metaphor for what I'm doing with John's words?
Unpicking, probing,
Unpicking and probing.
expanding,
Mhm. Anything that I'm not doing. So
focusing.
Yep, I'm unpicking, I'm probing, I'm expanding, I'm focusing. And then for those of you who just as you're listening to this model develop, what am I not doing?
You're not finishing his sentences.
I am not finishing his sentences, much as I like to do that. Yeah, anything else I'm not doing?
Disrupting.
I'm not disrupting. Which again, I'm quite a disruptive kind of person. So if I'm not disrupting, I'm not finishing his sentences, because I do, yeah, I'm not forcing him, piercing, I'm not forcing him in a specific direction. Cannon's saying I'm not judging. How do you know I'm not judging? What is it in the way I'm asking these questions or in my behavior? What lets you know that I'm not judging?
You're just relating the words, whatever he's saying to relate.
Yeah, it's really, really simple. What I do is I go, take a word, ask a question, take a word, ask a question. It's now obviously when you get good at this, I'm asking reasonable questions, but I didn't know what was the right question to ask for years. I just kept asking questions until I got a model. So it's very important that people can say whatever they like. The non-judgment is very important. So I'm trying to understand it, but if you try too hard to understand it, you say things like, oh, okay, so what kind of a thing is that? And all of the is in your face and in your tone. Or you go, oh, you know, I asked children, when you're learning at your best, you're like, what? And she said, I'm a slow snail. And if you go, a slow snail, she knows that you don't think that slow is a good word. But if you say, and you're a slow snail, and what kind of slow? And she says, I go slowly, but I leave a silvery trail. So whenever I learn something, I always can go back to it and I can get it anytime I want. And then you understand she's a slow learner, but she's a good learner. Yeah, so there's something about you're not judging. And Yikming is saying, I'm not imposing any suggestions or recommendations. I'm just going to check, because I was hoping that I'll be able to put you all into a little group to have a go. Victor, after we've done the next round, are we able to put people into threes to have a go?
Yes.
Great. Because it's, you know, I know how to do this. I can demonstrate it, but actually I want you to do it. So thanks, John. I'm going to leave yours for a minute, John, and I'm just going to go on to Victor. So Victor, when you're, and this time the rest of you, you're going to have to start to do some work. So I'll start it with Victor, but you're going to ask the questions now. Victor, when you're working at your best, you're like what?
Mesmerized, in the zone.
Okay, so what are some questions? Don't answer any of these, Victor. We'll just let the group generate. What are some questions that we could ask him? And you can ask any questions. If they become unclean, that's brilliant. We'll be delighted, because then it helps us to go, oh, okay, that's what that question does. So don't worry about being clean or not. Just give us, what are some questions that we can ask him? And you can write them or you can shout them out.
What kind of mesmerized?
Great. So we could ask him what kind of mesmerized. Lovely. Exploit. What's another question that we could ask him?
Is there anything else about mesmerized?
Yep. So what kind of mesmerized? Is there anything else about mesmerized? Those are two attribute questions. Lovely. What else could we ask him?
Where are you when you're in the zone?
Yep. So when you're in the zone, so you might say whereabouts in the zone, and when you're in the zone, because I don't think he said I'm in the zone. I think he just said mesmerized in the zone. But if he used an I, then we can say where are you? But yeah, where in the zone? So we can ask him location questions. Where are you in the zone? Yeah. What else could we ask him?
Where about mesmerized?
Yeah. When you're mesmerized, whereabouts is mesmerized? Lovely. What have we not got? Yeah, we've got, I see the metaphor question's a funny one because in the zone is a metaphor. So it'd be a bit weird to say, and when you're in the zone like what? Because it is a metaphor. So you would only use, but you could possibly say, and when you're mesmerized, that's mesmerized like what? Yeah. That's the metaphor question. So let's ask some of those now. So what kind of mesmerized, Victor?
In the zone. Hence I introduced that.
So in the zone is the better answer to the first one. So sometimes when people are thinking, they give you one answer and then they're like, oh, like, and then they give you that one. And so this one ceases to be as interesting to him. And so you can't go back to it. Like, nah, that's not it anymore. So you're in the zone. So now you have to generate me some more questions for in the zone, guys. So when you're in the zone, where are you in the zone?
So I feel as if my mind has separated from my physical self. Looking at myself externally and the work that I'm involved in the moment.
Okay, I'm just going to pause you a minute, Victor.
Okay.
So I feel as if my mind has separated from my physical self. I'm looking at myself and my work in the moment. Yes. So now we can find out all sorts of interesting things. What questions could we ask him? Yeah, so John's saying, yeah, we can have what happens when you're in the zone. So Grassal's saying, yeah, we could just say what happens when you're in the zone. What happens just before you're in the zone. Now we've got the separation.
How do you decide? Sorry, how do you decide which direction to take? Because it's saying many things there.
Yeah, there's loads we could do. All I can say is at the moment, at the stage you're all at, you won't know. Just ask 6 questions and then go on to something else. Don't do anything else.
So what kind of separation?
Yeah, so what kind of separation? We could go for this. We could go, what kind of separation? Yeah. What else could we ask him?
What happened before the separation?
Yep. What happened just before?
Where does your mind go after you separate?
Yeah. Where does my mind go? So if my mind is separated from my physical self, think of it always like a structural engineer. Where did it go to? How far did it separate? And always think to yourself, what is the purpose? If, it's like my whitewater rafting. How come it's important to me that we all fall in the river? Like, there's got to be a purpose to it. If my mind separates, what can he do with a separated mind that he cannot do when his mind is in his physical body? Otherwise, it wouldn't separate. Metaphors have purpose always, and it's your job to find out how does this thing work. And that's what's so beautiful about being asked the questions well, is because someone is deeply interested in the logic of your system and how it's organized. So yeah, so as if my mind had separated, where is the mind when it's separated? And we might follow that up with a where from, and then I'm looking at myself and my work. So then I might say, and when I'm looking at myself and my work, then what happens? Or what, I could say, you don't have to be absolutely clean. If you want to learn clean language, go on a training, it's really useful. And if you learn to be squeaky clean, then it's a very, very good training. But you can also say, so what's important to you? When you've separated like that, what does that give you? They're not quite so clean, but you're still looking at sequence. Oh, now, if I make you all go away, well, you all wish that you had some of those answers now. Okay, let's get some of the answers. So Victor, when your mind's separated, where does it separate to?
Right above me.
How far?
1 meter.
And when it's right above me and I can see myself and my work, then what happens?
I can think independently as an observer of myself.
And as I think independently, what happens when I think independently from myself?
I become hyper-productive. I'm able to focus.
And what kind of focus is that focus?
Laser focused.
Ooh. Now we've got a laser. And of course, if we work with Victor, oh, sorry, I've got a dog that really wants to be in here with us. Thank you. Come on in. If we worked with Victor, it's going to be important for us to say to him things like, what could we do that would support you? What could anybody else do that would support you to be laser focused? Is there anything I could do that would really stop you being laser focused? So those questions of sequence, what needs to happen for you to separate like that? Where does that come from? Is there anything that could stop that? And you might find he can't do it for very long. Obviously I don't know Victor at all. He gets in that zone for weeks, or maybe he gets in the zone for a little while and then he has to go outside and walk. Like we need to know, how does this thing work over time if we're going to work together? And then I can understand he's not just lazing around outside. He's recouping and ready for this laser focus that's going to come out when he can separate. Okay, any questions? Yeah, any questions just about what I'm doing so far? Because I'm going to give you a different topic and then I'm going to send you away to do this without me.
Just a quick question, Caitlin. When do we know when to stop? Because this seems like a good conversation. We can go on forever, right?
Yeah. Okay, there's something that I'm doing. So there's 2 ways that you'll know when to stop. There's 3 ways you'll know when to stop. The most obvious one is time. Like, we only had 10 minutes. I've only got a certain bit of time to talk to you. The second is you've got enough to make sense. So I've got enough to start to predict what it's like to work with Victor. And if we're sharing time, it's like, I might not go fully into it, but I might just get just enough and then tell him about me. So a little bit like the example I gave you at the beginning about Tom and I know just enough about his blueprints. He knows just enough about my whitewater rafting, just enough to work out how we're going to work together. But the third thing is you're just beginning at the moment. And so the first thing they say, like, I'm in the zone. Let's think of it as being, that's your target, like my duck cup. And that's what he chose to share in front of a group. He said, I'm happy to publicly say, in the zone. We can ask loads of questions about that are adjacent to that. So what happens just before he's in the zone? What kind of zone is it? We've found out about the separate. We asked a question about that, and that gave us a laser focus. So let's think of it a little bit like a traffic light. So now we've got this laser focus. If we ask what happens just before you separate, that will give us an orange answer. The next zone, think of it as red, because this is now non-adjacent to what he said at the beginning. And the next question is far enough away. You are not therapists. It is not your job to go rummaging around in Victor's psyche to see what interesting things he's got lurking there. Just enough. Yeah. So go back to my cups. You can kind of, 2's fine. That's your target. That's what he first said. This one's immediately adjacent. That one's adjacent to this answer. That's probably enough. You might go one more if you really need to it, but once you go to red, then you stop and you go back to the beginning. Or you kind of go, that's plenty. Do people get that? The reason I tell you this is I made a big mistake with it when I was, a couple of times when I was first developing this, where I pulled back and pulled back and pulled back. A company startup, I said, you'd like this company to be like what? He said, I'd like it to be safe. I said, what kind of safe? He said, well defended. I said, and when it's well defended, is there anything else about well defended? He said, you know, somewhere that we can go and feel and hide. And when we're hiding from what? Well, you know, from people outside. What kind of people are those kind of people outside? Oh, this is making me remember when I was bullied at private school. And you go, okay, that man did not choose to tell his team about being bullied at school. I dragged him there because all of us carry patterns from our childhoods. So how we learn to separate our minds from our bodies, those are things we learn, you know, as we're developing. But some things you just don't pull them back and pull them back because they didn't choose to share that stuff. So that was a long answer, Boney, but that was that time, yeah, usefulness, and don't go more than 3 away from what they agreed to share with you.
Thank you, that was really helpful.
Right. Okay, any other questions just before we go on to the next section? Okay, so in this next section, we're going to say, when you're at your worst, you're like what? What are you like? At your worst, you're like what? And what I want you to do is to put some of it into chat, and I'll just demonstrate a little bit, but you're going to go and practice it together. And in chat, I'm going to put you some questions. So give us some answers in chat. When you're at your worst, you're like what? Appears like a snake. John's anxious. And melted ice cream. And stressy. And then, oh, quiet. I was thinking, I misread that, Ning. I was thinking it said, I become quite, and I was waiting for the next one, but you don't mean that. You mean you become quiet. Lovely. Edwin's angry. Boney's a roaring tiger, passive aggressive. So I'm giving you a few questions. So what happens, just the ones we've already had, what happens just before? What happens next? What we're going to do is you're just going to go away, and you won't all get a go to have your stuff explored. But we'll ask you just a couple of questions. What happens just before? What happens next? And you've always got your like what question. Okay, so there's some questions for you to take with you. So let's take Mahesh's sniper first. Mahesh, when you're a sniper, a shooter, and it's really random. Just going to ask him. I'm going to ask him 2 questions, and then the other person in my group is going to ask him 2 questions. It's going to be that simple, and then we're going to swap to the next person. So Mahesh, when you're a sniper, what kind of sniper?
I can see someone who is waiting to get back with a lot of force.
Sorry, my dog was
like this. Yeah, like somebody who's waiting to come out with a lot of force.
waiting to come out with a lot of force.
Mm-hmm.
You can ask a different question. What's a different question that we can ask Mahesh? Yikming says, what are you shooting?
Mm-hmm.
Whereabout you are waiting?
Yeah, whereabouts is the waiting?
Okay. I can answer the first one maybe. Shooting, my mind goes to the threats, eliminating the threats maybe.
So eliminating threats, eliminating threats. Yep. And what kind of waiting? When you're waiting to come out with a lot of force, what kind of waiting?
It's like thinking and acting appropriately into that moment.
Right, so thinking and acting appropriately. Yep. And John's asked, what kind of force? So when you're waiting to come out with a lot of force, what kind of force is that force?
Yeah. I imagine two ways to look at that force. Either something that takes care of my intention, or something that can change the ways to create a win-win situation. It's like a two-way thing for me.
Okay.
Like,
I've got to say, Mahesh's sniper is a lot more reasonable than mine is. Mine just waits to kill you when you're not looking. So obviously he's got quite a nice at his worst. Okay, so that's 4 questions. So that's plenty, and then move on to the next person. So we're just going to send you away just for 4 minutes each. So 2 of you are likely to get a go, not all of you, but that's usually okay because some of you are happier to share than others. So we're going to have 8 minutes. Ask one person 4 questions, then go around to the next person. So go and have a little go, and let's see how you get on without us.
All right. So groups of how large? 4?
About 3 or 4.
Okay.
Any questions just before you go? Dana needs to drop off.
Yep.
See you later. Right. So very simple, like what kind of, where, is there anything else? Those kind of questions. And don't try to be too clever. Just ask 4 and see what you get, and then move on to the next person.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go.
Victor, can you make me co-host?
Yes, I was thinking to do so. Hold
Just so
on.
I can see who's in which rooms.
Okay. There you go.
Lovely.
You're welcome.
So I'm just looking, do you know if Boney's got nobody in their room with them? We could just move him.
Yes, with
Move him to Yikming?
yes, I can do that. Let's do that. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, that looks like everyone's got someone to play with.
Yes.
I know some people come on, but then they wander around doing family things, so they can't actually join
Yes.
in properly, especially this time of night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm just going to go and take this dog out of my room because she's so naughty. When she can see that I've got bits of paper, she likes to chew them up. So I'll just be back in 1 second.
Ready.
Come on, you. Where are you? Arch, come. Come on. Lie down. That's what you're going to do. I think I'm just going to pop into other people's rooms and just see how they're getting on.
Yes.
I'll just make sure that they've all got someone to talk to.
Yes. So the group 6 was confused for a bit because they're wondering if there was meant to be 3. So I think that's yeah. I think they're good now.
Yeah, that one was fine. I'm just going to go to room 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're all fine.
Great.
So we've just got till past, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So 8:30, another 13 minutes.
Yeah, so I won't really have time
Yeah.
to do when you're making decisions. I kind of feel that the group's done really well. They've joined in like nicely, and they're all working quite well in their pairs.
Beautiful.
Yeah. You've got quite a few people from different countries, I notice.
That's the beauty of going online now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, so I was observing the response to metaphors when you ask questions to the group. To my earlier point around this being something less common in Singapore, I think which I attribute mostly, in my estimation, to the culture and the manner in which we speak most of the time.
I wonder how much, or if there's a difference between the amount of metaphors used by Singaporeans to, let's say, Americans or Russians. you know, it is interesting where does the language lend itself to that? I don't know whether there have been strong cross-cultural studies, but do you have metaphors like, so if I say things are looking up, do you have metaphors like that in your language?
Other than English, you mean?
Yeah.
I would say so, yes, but so this lands to a good question, because that's the one thing that I've observed. Now, the manner in which Singaporeans speak, because of the roots of the group, we tend to speak quite superficially. You know, our vocabulary tends to be limited. It's almost a pidgin or Creole. So most of us tend not to describe our experiences in metaphors. And I suspect that's the reason for that most of the time. So
what's the language of Creole of?
A pidgin of, maybe more like a pidgin, but anyway, it's a mix of the Southern Chinese or Southern China dialects, a variant of Mandarin,
Okay.
a mix of Malay, a lot of Malay language, in fact, Malay language vocabulary, and English.
Okay, so a little bit like when, see, in Malaysia, people tend to have a very strong base language and then be able to mix into lots of others. Oh, it's interesting. We'd have to go and listen and translate a bunch to see, are the metaphors lurking around in there? Or is it, as you say, is it because it's a mix? Are people being more transactional in their language and sharing less of their thoughts?
Right, exactly.
When we went and did drama-free conversations in Japan, a bunch of different people said, hi. It's like, is your time up?
Yeah, there was 2 of us, so it doesn't take a lot of time.
Okay, lovely. So you brought yourself back. How did you get on?
I would say it's not as straightforward as it seems.
Yeah, we were struggling a bit.
Yeah, but it's fun exploration.
Yeah.
It's so easy to answer. It's easier if you're just thinking about it, but to get it out your mouth is actually quite hard.
Yeah.
Because all of the things that you normally do, that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. If those guys are finished, we could probably close the rooms just a little bit early.
Sure. Would we like to give them a minute more, or?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Great. Yes, I was saying when we did this in Japan, people said, oh, you know, the Japanese culturally don't share intimate details, but it's difficult because I don't speak Japanese. I was working with a translator, but I would say that within a very short period of time, people were able to develop and share metaphors, but it was unusual. It wasn't, they found it very useful, but it wasn't the normal, the natural way of sharing information. But I do know that, because we've got a few Japanese students now who teach it over there, that once they get the hang of it, they've got parenting groups who are using it to then listen to their children's natural metaphors and work with them. But it was like a mind shift had to go, oh, okay, we're going to do this kind of thing. I think to a certain extent that's true. You know, in my culture, people don't naturally talk about metaphors. They think of it as a literary thing,
Yes.
not as a conversational thing. I'd be interested if you don't just listen to the language, watch the way people speak. Look at the gestures, because, you know, if I go into a business meeting and somebody says, well, we need to just transform the company. We need to get a clear goal and work backwards. And somebody else is saying, but we've really just got to think, who do we want to be? It doesn't really matter where we're going. Who do we want to be? And you just go spatially. Those people are not on the same page, you know? And so, yeah, it's really worth looking at their gestures as well as listening to the words.
Yes, for sure. I'm just going to call them back now.
Okay.
Oh, give me a minute. So I think the language, as you've alluded to, lends itself to metaphor, at least in English, to metaphors quite easily compared to. So for Ploy's from Thailand, for example, and I've learned from her as well that that's not all that common in the Thai language even. So there are plenty of naturally metaphorical expressions and anthropomorphizations, to my understanding, in English. And even in casual speak, we may say things like, you know, it's getting long in the tooth, for example. We just don't speak that way in Singapore.
Yeah. Ploy, is that similar or different in Thailand?
I think like in Thailand, in our language, we usually reserve metaphor for like literature. So like really old dated literature will come with a lot of metaphor. Yeah, but I think like in modern languages, people don't use that a lot of the times. Yeah, so it's kind of like not as natural as English, I would say.
So how did you get on?
It was great.
Yeah.
I was with John, and he's been trained in clean language before. I just saw,
you got yourself an expert.
Yes, I just saw your TED talk this afternoon when I received the email. So I'm totally new to this.
Yeah.
I'm not trained at all. I've read Caitlin's book, and I've read a few others, and I'm just starting to practice on friends and relatives. I haven't used it as a coach yet. But
look at him, he's rejecting that somebody who knows what he's doing label really quickly. But I mean, Ploy was saying that it's a lot trickier. It's not as straightforward to do it as it is to listen to it or to receive it. How other people, how did you get along? How was it?
We found that we very quickly got to that outer circle and had to pull back. Yeah. And we needed to be really respectful of each other.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because you can easily get yourself lost in somebody's stuff just by asking the last thing they said. And I really, really encourage you not to do that. So great, well done that you pulled back, because you can end up in places that they didn't expect to be. And also it's like, if you're asking the questions, I think you have to do the due diligence to know where you are and what you're asking that question for. So if you just wander off with them, there's no control. So that's great. Anyone else? How did you get on? I did pop in to just make sure that you all had someone to work with. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to do making decisions. You can do that on your own now that you've all had a little go. So you can ask colleagues when you're making decisions, and just listen to the difference between when you're at your best, you're like what, and when you're making decisions, you're like what, or making decisions is like what. Those will get you very different answers. So whatever the first question is, so when you're making decisions, you're like what is a very different question. That'll get you an embodied, how do I make decisions metaphor. If you say making good decisions is like what, that will get you their concept or their theory about it. So just be aware that changing those words. So we've got 2 minutes. Anyone got any questions, or what would you like to know just before we end today?
All the stuff we're learning in this session, are they all in your book?
Yes. Yeah, I'll write down the book for you. Yeah, it's all in my book. There's lots and lots of ways of learning this stuff. So you can learn from reading, and my book's also on Audible. So you can, so I'm just going to get you a link to it. So you can also just link into it as well. Yeah. Any other questions? Actually, yeah, the systemic modeling program, I will. I can't talk and look at a computer. Those two things. I can do lots of other things simultaneously. So let me just have a quick look. Yeah, the systemic modeling program, that's if you want to be able to do this with groups. It's a really specific thing. That means that you can facilitate a group to do it simultaneously. So that's the systemic modeling. Symbolic modeling is, can you kind of do this one-to-one? Clean coaching, drama-free conversations, they're mainly working one-to-one. Systemic modeling is, can I get a team to ask each other these questions to resolve problems at source? It's a, it's a different level of doing it, and it's a tough old course, but if you want to do it, go to Clean Learning. I'll just give you the Clean Learning link, and look at events, and you have to go through Clean for Teams first to demonstrate those skills, and then symbolic modeling. Anyone got any other questions? Just while I get this. Does the working with groups approach work with families? It does. However, unless you're very brave, I wouldn't work with your own family. So I work with my family, but only because there was no one else to do it. Because my sister was really, really struggling with her relationship with my father. And we did it really, really carefully. We would take a family incident that we'd all seen, and we'd say, for you, it was like what? For you, it was like what? For you, it was like what? And for you, it was like what? And that's exactly the same process I used yesterday in some conflict resolution with a senior, with a board, where somebody had been dismissed for gross misconduct, and they had never spoken his name again, even though they'd worked together for 16 years, because they didn't know who had told on him. But that process that I used yesterday is exactly the same one that I used with my family, to help the group understand why my sister was experienced my father as bullying her. And he learned it, sometimes old dogs learn new tricks. He really understood it, and then he was able to understand how his patterns of behavior came from his father. And we were able to build a really good relationship with him slowly over 5 years, but as a result of that conversation. And he didn't want it. So yeah, it was a really special thing that you can do. Okay, we're over time. Sorry, Victor.
Oh, not at all. Yes.
I put the book reference, and then if you go to Clean Learning, you can see different different ways that we offer training. But there are lots of ways of doing it, and it doesn't always have to cost money. You can just, we also have a Clean Campus. You'd have to join with me on LinkedIn if you want to. I'm Caitlin Walker on LinkedIn. We have a Clean Campus where you can just come along and practice, a little bit like a meetup. You can just come along on a Tuesday or a Saturday and just practice with other people. That's a great way of doing it. All yours now, Victor.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right, so we are at the end of the end, and I'd just like to let us all thank Caitlin together for her generosity and for coming to speak at our meetup. So one other thing is Caitlin has also shared a resource that I could distribute to the group. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to her or myself. And if you have any questions or are interested in following up more on Clean Learning, feel free to either drop myself an email or reach out to Caitlin directly. I think we are looking at a class. I think there is one scheduled for November. Is that right, Caitlin?
That's right. Yeah.
So if you're interested, that will be one to look out for.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd said to Victor is if you want one that's good for Singaporean time, then if you let us know, if there's about 4 or 5 of you interested, we've always then the Australians can join in and the Malays can join, the Malaysians can join in. So if you want to get together and do something, if you let us know, we can craft something that's good for your time zone. Lovely. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you all. Thanks, Caitlin.
You're welcome. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great week ahead.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Caitlin.
Yeah.
Thanks, Caitlin.